Welcome to the archive. In today's episode, Connor and I are doing a book review of The Four Agreements, written by Don Miguel Ruiz. If you have read the book, let us know how you feel about it, any thoughts that you have in the comments. If you haven't, a link will be in the description for you to go check it out. With that, let's jump right in. So The Four Agreements, a Toltec wisdom book, is a nonfiction self-help text geared towards becoming better people. The main motif of this book is to become better at communication and communicating with others and becoming happy. Also, that happiness is a choice that we make, and we can achieve happiness through communal effort and including others properly in our lives and how we actually interact with those people. There is some criticism for this book. It is a little bit new agey. Some of the examples and experiences that are written about by Don Miguel Ruiz can be a little off-putting to some.
But Toltec is a real tribe somewhere, right?
Yeah, the Toltecs were a real warrior class tribe of people in South America.
So at the very least, it extracted from somewhere that's ancient.
Yeah, I mean, it's real knowledge that comes from a real culture in the world. It's not just made up mumbo jumbo.
Right.
But the examples that the author uses in order to get forward, to push forward his ideas can be off-putting to some people because he uses concepts like white and black magic to describe a certain scenario. Or some of the examples can just be a bit new agey for some people.
Gotcha.
But if you can get past that, or if that's right up your alley, this book is a wonderful text to read. It's very short and sweet, easy to understand, not a lot of giant words. You don't have to be an intellectual to get this book. And really, it does help improve communication. And honestly, if you read it, you might see a path to becoming a happier person.
So one thing that I've always noticed as it pertains to self-help books is that for whatever reason, compiling pieces of advice into a list format just makes it easier to retain. I mean, obviously the big one right now is 12 Rules for Life, but one thing I appreciate about this book is that he was able to distill it into just 4.
Yeah, and that's also one thing that I really appreciate about it as well. I first read this book when I was 14 years old, and it actually was very approachable and easy to understand, and that's why I think it's so popular among, his fan base.
Right.
There are 4 agreements. We'll just jump into them right now, and we kind of go over them one at a time.
Yep.
The 4 agreements are: always try your best, never take anything personally, never make assumptions, and always be impeccable with your word.
Right. Not in that order.
Right. Not in that order, but for me, I will start with the one that I'm best at, or the one that I've integrated the most into my life, which is never take anything personally. What it essentially means to the author and to me is to recognize that when people are communicating with you, they are communicating with you from a place of their own internal positioning.
Right.
So most of the time when someone says something to you or does something to you or towards you or directs some sort of energy
Especially
at
if it's negative.
Especially if it's negative, most of the time it has nothing to do with you at all.
Right.
Usually people are just unconsciously experiencing life, and they're just sort of, they're taking in, inputs from the world around them. They sort of mull over them and integrate them into their core being.
Yeah.
And then they sort of reflect it automatically into the world without actually being aware of it.
Yes. Carl Jung once said the problems we have with others are the problems we have with ourselves. And I think this book kind of echoes that sentiment really well.
Right. Perfectly even.
Yeah.
So there is a concept in my personal philosophy, which is very similar. It's called the Funhouse of Mirrors, in which we actually have a discourse episode that we'll be going over a little bit of what that is. Shout outs to that discourse episode.
And the spider that we stepped on that inspired that one.
And the spider. Yeah, we'll link that video in the description as well as above us right now. But yeah, so never take anything personally, because you recognize that people, when they're rude or mean to you, it comes from a place of their own inner turmoil. So like when you're driving on the side of the road and somebody like cuts you off and they flick you off and they yell at you some profane thing, rather than immediately becoming angered by that and reflecting that same energy and raging out in traffic and potentially causing harm to people around you, you can absorb that negative energy, realize perhaps that person's having a really crappy day, perhaps their life sucks.
Right.
Perhaps they're just really terribly unhappy and they don't necessarily recognize how their actions can affect people around them. And whereas it doesn't mean that those actions should be excused, you can take the initiative in your own life to consciously make decisions about how you react and how you feel to external stimuli.
Yeah, right. And that's the idea of mental alchemy, right? It's like transmuting your emotions or transmuting the initial feelings that someone's actions gives you in a way that's like you said, it's not excusing the behavior, but it's making it so you can deal with it in a healthier way for your own psychology.
And the motivation of doing so properly is not necessarily just so you can feel better about whatever's happening. It's so that way you don't continue to reflect that negativity
Exactly.
into the world, because everyone is a process or a product of environment. And until human beings are, I guess, exposed to critical thought or to processes in which they are empowered to make conscious decisions about how they operate or behave or feel about things, everyone is simply just the product of their immediate environment and their genetics and their family life and the things that they've been exposed to. So by not taking those things personally, you can transmute your negativity into positivity, and you can transmute anger into pity or love even. So when someone, a good exercise is next time someone's yelling at you or being rude to you, try to tell them you love them and not be patronizing about it or condescending. Like be true. Say,
Right.
I'm sorry that you're having such a hard day. Obviously you're having such a hard day. Maybe when you're checking out in line at the grocery store or something and the cashier's being extremely rude to you, you can tell them how great it is of a job that they're doing, or that they mean that their hard work is meaningful to you, or that you appreciate them, or you can reach out and do something through your conscious effort and willful effort to make a difference in that person's life, rather than just being like walking away from them being like, oh, that person was a bitch.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's the thing right there, is that good advice can withstand the pressure, meaning that you can actually act as like your own scientist in your psychology, and you can practice these things and see if they work. Now, what I will say is that if you do what BJ's saying, the next time someone does something to you that maybe they've always done to you and you always react the same way, so you decide, no, this one time I'm going to act differently, they might not respond positively, but at least you know that you did the right thing, and you kind of broke that chain a little bit.
Right.
And also it's a good mechanism to figure out what that person's true intentions really are.
And again, it's not just about changing the action, it's changing how you feel about the stimulus that leads to you taking action.
Exactly.
So don't take it personally. That's the biggest thing, because if you don't take it personally, it makes it so much easier for you to give someone something rather than simply reflecting their energy that they directed at you.
That's a very Kabbalistic idea as well, right? Like giving every time you take.
Very Kabbalistic. Yes, it is indeed. That's a whole nother topic of conversation that we will discuss in future episodes, of the nature of receiving things and giving things as you receive things properly. Kabbalah, for anybody listening, is Judaic mysticism. But yes, I'm glad that you brought that up. The second agreement is actually the one that I'm worst at, which is always be impeccable with your word. And that means different things to a lot of people who read this book. For me, always being impeccable with your word personally means only saying really what you mean and keeping your words sacred, because words have power. They're tools, they're divine tools of basically magic. Like you can speak things into the world and create things with your words. Kind of that old saying, abracadabra, alakazam. Abracadabra literally translates to I create with my words, or I create with my speech. And that's magic.
Right.
And I think in life, I tend to deal with things comedically. I enjoy taking hard situations and making fun of them or making light of them, saying things I don't really mean. When I'm in fights with people sometimes and arguing with people, I can just be a bit, I don't know, just bullheaded and ostentatious and really just fight with people and say things I don't mean just to win the argument, or just to pick someone's, press their buttons or whatever. And a lot of comedians out there say things that they don't mean just for laughs and such. But when we say things that we don't really mean, and we're not really truly being impeccable with our words, we don't understand the impact that can have on the world around us. But it's basically as if we were accidentally letting gunshots off into the street. You know what I mean? If somebody's singing a song and they're belting it and giving their heart, putting it all in, maybe they're singing in the shower, and you're just having a bad day and it's annoying you and you have a headache, and you say, shut up, you suck. For you, maybe you really didn't mean that. Maybe they actually really are good and you tell them that they're good all the time. But in that one moment when you told them that they sucked, they didn't even know that you were listening. And while they were taking the shower, all of a sudden now you've crushed their spirit. And every time that they go to sing from now on in the future, they'll remember that thing that you said that they suck. And for whatever reason, they really cling to that. That was never your intention. You really believe that they're great, but you didn't tell them that they were great. And your words that were not impeccable cause damage in the world outside of your intention. And that's ultimately the underlying root of what this principle is trying to say. It's just be mindful of how powerful you can be. Be mindful of the things that you're saying, especially nowadays on social media with cancel culture and just people being held accountable for things that they say 10, 20 years ago.
Because now your word might be recorded permanently forever.
Permanently, yeah. And so now it's more important than ever to only speak what you mean and just to be really mindful and intentional about how you're communicating with others. And again, that is really, truly something that I'm terrible or used to be terrible at. It took a lot of work to get there. I still struggle.
I think when people first hear be impeccable with your word, they more so would think like, don't say you're going to do something if you're not going to do it. And I think that's also an important facet of it too. And that doesn't mean, that just means not saying something if you are even risking putting yourself in a situation where you're not going to be able to uphold it.
Right. And I definitely agree with you. I think that that's where a lot of people go when they interpret what this tenet or principle says.
I think it's multivariable, right?
Sure. It's all based on, the audience or whatever. But I agree with that. And in today's day and age, it's something that people of the older generations tend to complain about often is we don't really seem to stick to our word, the younger generation.
Yep. Postmodernism.
Sure, because words have no meaning, right?
Right.
Or the meaning is just, it doesn't
completely
matter.
Subjective by the individual.
Right, exactly. So for whatever reason, we just don't uphold our word anymore. We don't take it as bond. There's a lot of reasons for that, right? We could dive into that in a different episode.
But I think the ancients really did. I mean, there's that story where I forget the name. I think it was Lot or something. He gave up his birthright for a bowl of lentils. And there's something about the biblical stories where once something is uttered, it is now like law, basically. Because he said, yes, I'll give you my birthright for the bowl of lentils, solidified.
Even if it was like a sort of a half-assed, half-smirked, or like half-cocked smirk joke.
Right.
Yeah, because back in the day, I mean, that makes sense too, though, because now we have recording devices. We have cameras and audio devices and microphones and writing and everything that we can use to hold each other accountable. Before there was only the
contracts.
Word. Right. But before there was just words. I mean, if somebody said you did something bad in the tribe to their daughter and all you said was, no, I didn't, and she said, yes, you did, then there's a war of character, and it depends on the lifetime of character that you've built up in the view of that society for them to believe you or her. If there's no evidence in between, we live in a day and age in which, and this is changing rapidly, but you're innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
Before, it may have been a little bit different depending on what culture and time period you lived in. So all that you really had was your word, and to be impeccable with that word is to be responsible such that people understand that you are a good man or a good woman,
right,
and that they can trust you. And it's important as well to be trusted by the people that you're trying to build better relationships with. And ultimately, this is a self-help book on communicating better and building better relationships and spreading love and happiness, as happiness, again, is a choice that you're making consciously rather than mindlessly, blindly, reaching out for it. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's very intentional.
Exactly. Yeah, I like that. So I think the agreement that's been the biggest test in my life, and one that I've improved on greatly, is the idea of not making assumptions. And we already kind of talked about not taking things personally, which is predicated on kind of letting go of your assumptions a little bit. You have to assume that what the person is spewing at you isn't really a reflection of you, but rather a reflection of them. So that's first and foremost. But the idea of not making assumptions is really fundamental to any good dialogue, I think, which is kind of what our whole channel is predicated on. I don't assume that the reason you feel a certain way is because of anything other than the fact that we have unique life experiences that led us to different places and different ideas.
Yeah, for sure. Not making the assumption puts the ball in the court of the person that you're interacting with.
Exactly.
If you make an assumption, you are essentially stealing that power and control from them, or like the balance of power and control in the relationship as you guys are communicating or spending time together or whatever. And you're not really being fair or allowing the other person to speak their truth, and you're not really being receptive to that truth.
Right.
Because it's all coming from you. It's all you.
Exactly.
It's very postmodern, right?
Yep.
You're making assumptions on what they mean when they speak, rather than if they say something that upsets you or hurts your feelings, pause, run it back, have a discussion about what they actually meant, define terms, try really hard to see from their point of view before you assume what they meant by the words that triggered how you felt.
Yeah, and you'll learn that real quick in an intimate relationship, by the way. So long as you're communicating like you should be, you'll think in your mind over and over again that this is what they meant, and then once they give you the revelation of why they did what they did or said what they said, it's totally radically different than your initial preconception.
Most of the time. Because most of the time, your perception is just that, your perception.
Exactly.
And it doesn't always reflect the real truth or reality that's occurring around you. And I like how you pointed out that, letting go of the assumption is very similar to letting go of the personal feeling that you have when someone speaks to you in a way that triggers you. You're like juggling the same thing.
Exactly.
There.
They go hand in hand.
The only thing that I would say that I've never thought of as a slight criticism is, in order to never take things personally, you almost have to make an assumption that other people 95% of the time don't actually care about you when they're being rude to you.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? You do have to make that assumption that, okay, if he's being rude to me, he's just having a bad day, or he's just a terrible person and I feel bad for him for his life.
That's one assumption that might free you from a multitude of assumptions.
Which it's like the ideal assumption to make, so then we try to make it, which I agree with that. Or on the other hand, it's just a reminder that you're not taking things personally simply for the sake of not taking things personally. You're literally just deciding that I'm not going to take anything that these people do to me personally, even if they mean it personally, because in that 5% that I may or may not have assumed that they're not really, or that they are coming at me sideways, personally attacking me, you can free yourself of that negative energy and just understand that whether or not they are coming at you personally doesn't matter. You don't have to take it personally because you're in control of how you feel about the world.
Yeah, and I really like that. And I really like what you said about embodying the principle, even though it does require us to kind of make this assumption, which is kind of like a contradiction. It's still good to practice the principle for pragmatic utility. And I think you could say the same thing about not making assumptions. Even if you have evidence or a good reason to make an assumption, it's still best to just practice the principle because it'll be beneficial for your life.
Exactly. Yep. I agree with that.
Yeah.
That's a perfect way to put it. You literally just choose to make the agreements for the sake of their practical utility. Whether or not sometimes they're somewhat self-contradictory, they will lead you to better places.
Right. And like I said, with these ideas, you can be the scientist and see if they work. And I think good ideas like this will withstand that kind of pressure. So.
Yeah, awesome. Quick segue. Some ideas are better off espoused simply just because they are practical, whether or not they actually are really true.
Right.
Like Stephen Pressfield
and
his idea.
And some people might say that there is no hierarchy of ideas. And I learned this from you, actually. But by saying that, you're actually placing an idea that there is no good ideas or ideas that are better than others on the top of the hierarchy of ideas.
Yeah, literally you just espouse ideas for the sake of them being practical. So with that, there's one last one, which is always try your best. And I know that seems so simple. Like, why would we even have to put that into a book or even talk about it?
Right, because everybody should try their best, but
it's something we forget.
Right, but it's something that we drift on. And the reason ideas like that become cliche is because they're so true.
Right. And I think it's easy to not, ever since you're a kid in school or your parents are raising you from a young age, they're always like, try your best, just try your best. If you try your best, you can never fail. And we forget, why should we try our best when there's this world of distraction and this what if scenario that could play out? And why, there's so many things that are happening for perhaps why we don't try our best.
Yeah, why not just pursue hedonic pleasure your entire life?
Right. But if we try our best, then you can never fail, right? Or you can, at least if you fail but tried your best, you can forgive yourself.
Exactly.
And that's the biggest takeaway from this principle, I think.
Right.
And it's very simple. There's not a lot to be said. It's really just that.
Sorry, go ahead.
If you try your best, you can't, and you fail, you have no one to be mad at, because failure is just a stepping stone towards becoming a master of whatever it is that you're attempting to accomplish. And you let go of that attachment to the failure because you tried your best, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think people conflate trying your best with not failing.
Right.
But the truth is that failure is sometimes the greatest lesson. And I think the reason people don't want to put themselves in a position where they tell themselves, I'm going to try my best, is because you're actually creating that condition for failure. So another caveat of this is that you do have to be willing to embrace the falls and the pit stops and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to shout out the union of opposites, the concept and our actual segment that we'll link in the description, you have to understand that failure is part of success, and success requires failure in order for you to ever be successful. You have to fail in order to succeed. And if at first you don't succeed, try and try again is the old cliche as it goes. But as long as you tried your best, you're good to go. So those are the 4 agreements. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening for our audio only audience out there. Let us know what you feel about this book. Again, if you've read it, if you haven't, again, the link is in the description for you. You can find us on all major platforms: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Apple, Spotify, all the cool places. And yeah, with that,
We thank you for joining us and continuing the great conversation.